All right. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of This Week in Cassandra. Good times. This week, we've got Ben Bromhead with us from Insta Cluster. He's going to be talking about operations in the cloud with us in the second half. First, we're going to take a look at some of the news from the week. What do we got here today, guys? The first thing I think on our agenda, SSL vulnerability, pretty big deal.
It is a big, big deal. And it keeps being a big deal. It just doesn't seem like we get rid of this, right? I mean,
we just feel like we just got over Heartbleed, right? Wasn't that the last big one that made a huge splash?
yeah, so this is the drown attack. I love it. Heartbleed, drown. None of it sounds good, right?
They are good at coming up with names for this, for sure.
So Luke, what's the corner of this one? I mean, it's another man in the middle, of course, but what's the long and the short? Why do we care?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So this has been making the news just the last couple of days. They released a paper, I think, on March 1st is when this was disclosed. And it was actually kind of interesting because they did a scan and they found that something like almost a quarter of all the top 1 million domains were vulnerable to this. And so basically the vulnerability has to do with SSL v2. So this is a really old protocol that from the 1990s that most modern clients and servers actually don't even use this to communicate anymore. It's been replaced by TLS and other things like that. And but what they found when they went out and looked at this vulnerability was that a lot of web servers and a lot of that are publicly accessible still have SSL v2 enabled. Sort of as a even though clients aren't using it, it's still enabled on the server. And just by simply having it enabled still on your server, it's possible to expose yourself to sort of a man-in-the-middle type attack where somebody can probe your SSL v2 server that's not secure and then be able to intercept traffic using other protocols that are more secure like TLS. So kind of an interesting attack, and it was kind of shocking the number of websites out there that are vulnerable to this.
Shocking, but not so shocking. Well, and so why I think this really matters to I think the Cassandra community is, of course, you can use TLS and SSL to secure connections from one place to another, and inside the client communication, inside node-to-node communication, and yeah, you could use a very outdated certificate, and I think this is I always hated people putting infinity on their expiration of their SSL certificates because they probably created it in like 1995, right? And they're still using the same certificates. But
so Ben, you specifically called this out as something that we should definitely mention. What do you think? What do you think are the impact maybe on Cassandra? You said you didn't think JDKs, like modern JDKs, were probably vulnerable to this, but why are you worried about it as somebody working?
Yeah, I think one of the issues with it is that if you're using the same certificates on your Cassandra cluster in another place that is vulnerable to it, you can actually use that other service as an oracle to decrypt connections to Cassandra, even if it's using kind of like more modern SSL or TLS families. I'm pretty certain that SSL v2 has not been in any modern JDK for some time, so most people should be okay. But it's just a timely reminder to look at the rest of your infrastructure, and if you are sharing certificates, smack yourself on the wrist and go change that.
So upgrade your stuff, people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was my point too, and you could find it. I mean, SSL is used on more than just websites, of course. So we want to make sure that you're aware of that. I think if you're using Apache Cassandra, you're probably using it to serve some sort of website or mobile app or something. So there, go do your thing.
Hey, speaking of upgrading your stuff, interesting segue. Cassandra 3.4 feature freeze. How about that? Right? We get some new stuff coming out, don't we?
Yeah.
Hey, Juihai, you've been looking at SASE a lot recently. We talked a little bit about it a couple weeks ago. What do you think the state of this is at?
Yeah, so it's interesting because just yesterday, currently I'm staying in Riga in Latvia. So yesterday I gave a talk and I just show SASE in action.
Hmm.
So people were quite excited. And in
Yeah.
fact, yes, it is really nice because now, until now, we used to tell people, okay, guys, you cannot search on data easily. You need to design your schema to be able to query your data, which is still true. We continue to say that to people. But now with SASE, we add another level of flexibility for querying.
Yeah.
So we have different kind of query. For example, to go a little bit into detail, you can query data, text data. So you can create an index on your column. If it is a text column, you can choose either you use a tokenizer, so you split your text into tokens, so it's kind of full text search, or just simple text query.
Hmm.
And if you have a numeric value, you can choose another mode to query, to perform range query.
Hmm.
So when I show it at the conference, some of the guys, he's Oleg from OK.ru, which is a company using Apache Cassandra internally. So this guy is pretty advanced Cassandra user because he just forked Cassandra
Hmm.
for his own needs, and he was pretty amazed by this new index.
Yeah. I think it's important to talk a little bit about why we even need this, right? Like, I don't know if you've looked at kind of the old implementation or the existing implementation of secondary indexes, but they're pretty limited, right? Like, I think one of the big problems is that they're based on tables themselves, and tables, Cassandra tables really don't make good data structures for search indexes.
No, not at all.
At all, right? You have to know exactly what the primary key is, so you can only index things by like if you know the exact term that you're looking for.
Exactly.
So it makes a really terrible, flexible index. Like you can't really compare it to anything else that's available. Let's say with something that's through Lucene or something that does some sort of tokenization. Yeah. And then you end up with all sorts of there's other problems that you have with the existing secondary index implementation. Each term has basically it's a partition with a list of things that it points to, but it can't point to locations and files because of the compaction process. So you have indexes which are being compacted totally independently from the data that it points to, and so you can only point to keys. So you still have to go through the entire internal process of looking up your data. Like you still have to check Bloom filters, you still have to scan SS tables, you have to merge a bunch of stuff together, and that's not particularly fast, right? So if you have like a ton of data that's going to be coming back, it's going to take forever. Secondary indexes don't perform very well.
I think we also suffer from the wide partition issues also.
Exactly. So you end up with compaction problems, you have a lack of flexibility, you've got and then you have performance problems on top of that. So I think the interesting thing about SASE is it addresses all of these issues, right? You've got additional flexibility with the ability to tokenize text, so you can actually do prefix searching, which is amazing. We've got a like clause in Cassandra now, something I never would have thought that we've would have had. You end up with I think queries that are actually fast. So the short version, the architectural details are a SASE index is built with an SS table. So every time an SS table is flushed to disk, there is an index that goes along with it. And instead of pointing just to keys, it points to file offsets, and it's a B+ tree that's mapped into memory. So it's a data structure that's very efficient for indexes without the drawbacks of the B+ trees, which is they're terrible for updates and deletes. So you actually get to skip a lot of the nonsense. You get a ton of extra features, and they'll be more performant, assuming that we're going to keep them in memory. So that's kind of something that is important about SASE is it's you can actually start to take advantage of the extra memory on your machine. A lot of people, like, memory is so cheap, right? Like, it's every year you see the Amazon instances, same price, better more RAM, and you're like, well, I can get a box with 64 gigs of RAM. Like, what do I do with that? Allocated, your secondary indexes can take advantage of that now, and you can get some crazy performance out of it.
Terabyte servers are around the corner. I guarantee this. They are going to happen within a year or two. We are about an AWS reinvent from having a terabyte instance available.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and
they're shipping, but you can. Yeah, it's going to be when it becomes the cloudy thing. They're just going to be so usable.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the other thing that's cool about SASE is these have been, this is a contribution from Pavel and Jordan West. Really smart dudes that work over at Apple. They're really, really bright guys. And so this is just very, very, very cool stuff.
So a little plug here. We are going to be doing a meetup on the Apple campus on April 4th, and that's in Cupertino. It will be those guys talking about, they're going to be unveiling this to the world. So this will be pretty monumental event. There are 200 seats available, so we will be posting that next week on meetup.com if you're in the Valley and you want to come see this. I would just watch Planet Cassandra Twitter for the announcement, but that's going to be a huge event.
Yeah, this is I can't even tell you how excited I am for this feature. I mean, this is going to make everyday querying faster and more flexible. And also, if you've got Spark jobs that you want to do real predicate pushdown, you'll be able to take advantage of these indexes and get much faster Spark jobs for your analytics purposes. So this is like, in my opinion, this is one of the biggest features to come into open source Cassandra in a while.
I think one other point that's important to make is that, like, for people that are new, that are coming from a relational database world, that come to Cassandra, they see secondary indexes. They see, oh, Cassandra has secondary indexes, and they think, oh, it must work like I'm used to with a relational database. Yeah, and we spend a lot of time telling people, don't do that. Like, they don't work how you think they do, and then we spend a lot of time kind of explaining how they work. And I think you touched on it, John, like that added flexibility that is coming as part of that. Transition database background, they're going to have that much more functionality that they're kind of more used to from the Oracles and the MySQLs of the world, and so I think it's going to make it easier for people to transition to over to Cassandra.
Yep. One extra point though. I mean, this is a really, really good point that you touched on here. It's going to make it easier for people to transition, but it's also important to emphasize. It's still, whenever possible, better to create multiple views of your data and be able to query a single partition. Like, this is not just a free, like, hey, it's awesome, like, it's the best thing in the world, like, just use it everywhere. Like, you don't get to throw out all the best practices of data modeling. Like, Patrick, you actually just posted, you had a blog post last week on Planet Cassandra about why the primary key is so important. Exactly. That doesn't change.
No, first rules still apply, but I think just kind of cap this topic is just stay tuned, because as this feature is developed and is continuing to be developed, we'll learn more about the performance. We'll learn more about how you should deploy it. So just stay tuned. Watch Planet Cassandra. Watch our Twitter feeds. This will be a hot topic. It will be heavily talked about for the next few months, and meetups. You name it. Planet Cassandra, of course, is a great place. But also, I think DataStax Academy, we're going to probably have some course on there, some tutorials on using, materialized views with SASE. I mean, these are all features that you need to know how to use before you deploy them in production.
Yep, absolutely.
I think I'm going to do some technical deep dive and do a blog post to explain people how it works internally. Because there are some tricks, like, for example, as John said, people should not use it blindly. For example, if you put an index on user email, so we know that for one email address you get at most maximum one person. So it means that if you put even with SASE index, it may scan your whole cluster. So there is no magic here. We are not selling magic. We are selling software. So the thing
So
is,
get your scuba gear on. Dweehive doing a deep dive.
Yeah,
You're
that's
guaranteed it's gonna go deep.
So that actually brings up a really Patrick, you mentioned there, about as this feature kind of stabilizes and matures. One of the things that I've kind of been struggling a little bit to wrap my head around, just kind of as someone who consumes the open source Cassandra project, is 3.x versioning is very confusing at the moment. And we've been in the community for a while, and we thought we had our processes nailed about when do we start to introduce things into production, and then 3.0, how do we do it? What happens?
Yeah, there's so with I can, it's kind of it can be a little bit tricky if you're not familiar with the Tock release cycle. So with 3.0, open source Cassandra switched to a Tock release cycle. It's a monthly release cycle, and if the version number ends with an odd number, then you can consider it a bug fix release. If it ends with an even number, then it's a feature release. So version 3.4 we mentioned, that's a feature release. 3.5, which will follow it, is a bug fix release. 3 and then 3.0 is still receiving. We'll be receiving updates as well. So 3.01, 3.02, those will all be bug fix releases.
So if you think about, and Ben, I think what you're talking about is a matter of stability and what you feel like you can put into production. I don't think it would be wise to put an even release. I mean, this almost goes to my, to like Linux kernel guidelines, right? The even odd number on the kernel. But you wouldn't put an even number in production because it is a new feature release. But if you put an odd number in, you're not expecting anything new. So these should be rolling up any bugs in the whole 3.0, 3.x up to that point. So that's going to give you some assurance that that you're getting not something that's got new things to worry about, but it's rolling up bug fixes that will hopefully cover things that were released previous to that.
Yeah.
The good thing, I think.
So what odd number do I choose?
Yeah, that's a good number. You tell me. Well, it's I think that the old adage was you wait until .6 with Cassandra, right?
Yeah, and
I believe that's the coli conjecture.
The coli conjecture, yes.
That is, and I think that's kind of what I've been getting at is like I get for us, we've got our own internal test and release process that we use to kind of verify things once we've got a good gut feel that hey, it looks kind of good.
Right.
But I guess how does everyone who might not necessarily have that same testing and verification process that we do internally for our customers, what's a good gut feel to at least start looking at doing this?
Well, I know we have people that are either in production or pre-production with 3.3.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you think about that as well, okay, well that's almost 5 months, almost 6 months of Cassandra 3.x out in the wild. That covers that 6-month period. Mm-hmm. So you could probably think of that as a good starting place. And when 3.5 comes out, it's probably going to be the next iteration up. But I would say that's my guidance right now is looking at 3.3 as a real contender.
Sure.
Because I see people doing that.
Yeah, and I know people on the dev mailing list might not like this a little bit because I understand the purpose of the Tock was to start to get features out the door a little bit quicker and in a safer manner, so you don't have these big massive releases that are riskier to adopt. But I feel like we need some sort of middle ground, particularly in the the 3.x transition series.
Yeah, well that's why we have the 3.0, right? So 3.0 is continuing to receive patches. So that's kind of like you could think of 3.0 as a longer term stable release. Yeah,
that's like an LTS and LRM. Yeah, so it will be held up through the 3.x lifespan until we'll probably reevaluate when it comes to 4.0 if that's a good idea or not. But just to bridge the old with the new, that was the decision made. So the 3.x, the 3.0 dot number, 3.0.x, those are just backported bug fixes into the 3.0.
Cool.
Yeah. So we've covered. Yeah, we've got 3.4. We got some excitement. We got some confusion. Another thing, and this is something that I think Ben is probably pretty excited for, is the custom tracing that's going into 3.4, enabling support for things like Zipkin, which I think is a really, really big deal. So if you're not, Ben, are you familiar with any of this? What do you?
Yeah, I guess where our excitement comes from is sometimes like you've been running Cassandra in production for a year. You're getting pretty good at it. You know enough to be dangerous, and then you've saved yourself a couple of times. Your data model's humming along. You're growing. You're scaling. It's all going great, and then all of a sudden, one or two servers start throwing, massive like GC pauses, and it's like random, and it's like, what's going on here? And this kind of tracing becomes really great in finding outliers within your data model. It becomes really great in, you've got that one user who's got 10 million followers on your amazing social network that you just started yesterday. And they've completely thrown out your data model, and so having that tracing and being able to kind of dig into it is really good. Mm-hmm. In the past, we've had to have some terrible, horrible scripts that have just gone in and passed some of the contents of system traces, but there's been no way to kind of link that to what's going on the application side. So being able to plug in and kind of get this end-to-end tracing, particularly with something like Zipkin. I'd recommend everyone checks Zipkin out. I know it doesn't necessarily have tooling for every language and project out there, but it is a really cool project. It just gives you that end-to-end visibility, so you can start to really have a good deep dive when things go wrong, and it's really good for that 1% class of problems that just have let you scratch your head for a while and you eventually figure it out. So we're excited.
So Ben, since you're one of the founders of Insta Cluster, you talk about 1%. Do you end up seeing this type of thing, like this type of problem manifest frequently enough with with your customers, where this is the type of thing that is going to be able to save people like a lot of time or money, preventing performance problems?
Definitely. And when I say 1%, that's not 1% of all Cassandra users. That's 1% of your queries or what you're doing, right? And that's spread over a lot of people. That happens a lot. So I'm just looking at this, and I'm thinking about like our engineers helping our customers out to figure out and diagnose this stuff, and this is going to help our customers out. This is going to help the community out massively, and it's also going to save us a lot of time. Which, to be completely selfish, that's what I'm most excited about. But I know it's going to help a lot of people out. So it really is about your mean time to recovery or fixing a particular issue, particularly with weird data model issues, and seeing what's happening under the hood, the number of SS tables it's reading associated with a particular query. I'm excited.
What would you say are some of the most common problems that people have? They've got servers in the cloud, like you're helping them run stuff. What problems do you see that they run into most frequently?
I think at the end of the day, data model is still the number one killer for people out there. Like, look, Cassandra, it's a database that runs on Java, so you got some funny stuff to kind of do there. But look, the community has done an amazing job getting the default JVM settings to a great place. Look, there's still a few outdated things in Cassandra-M, but there's lots of great resources to improve that. And just getting it set up from an operations side, you've got services like ours that take care of it. You've got products like DSC that help you out with that. So what we tend to find is that most people, it's the data model that really kills them. And particularly you can get in a situation where you go live with Cassandra, you've migrated from some other database, or you've built this project fresh on it, and everything's going great for about the first 6 months. Then you start to add capacity, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, this is not happening, and you realize those secondary indexes weren't a particularly great idea, or all of a sudden you get a big customer, and all of a sudden their queries are just going really slow, and that's because they've got really wide rows because your bucketing wasn't quite right. So I think
talking about data model, do you enforce any control every time your customer create a new schema? Because maybe it's probably the best place, the best time to see that, to anticipate future issues.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do when we onboard someone is we actually completely for free review their data model and schema and try and identify any low-hanging fruit. I wish we did have an automated process, but really there are some schemas and data models where that might not be appropriate for a service that requires super low latency stuff. But if someone doesn't really care too much if it's a 200, 300 millisecond read from a very wide row, they're not too worried about that. So by us having a look at it, helping them out, just identifying any kind of red flags or things that they might shoot themselves in the foot, they get a great experience with Cassandra up front. But certainly for us, data model is the thing that we really focus on in helping people out and making sure it's ready to scale for the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Right on. All right. Well, I think it's time we can wrap this up. We're about at our limit. We've got a lot more information on the Planet Cassandra This Week in Cassandra blog, so definitely check that out. Ben, thank you very much for coming on. It was awesome talking about operations in the cloud. And don't forget to update your SSL, people. This is very, very important. So thank you very much. All right. See you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.